I made £46,000 from this 3-bedroom council house. How did I do that? You better watch and find out. What is happening, folks? My name is Robbie, and today I'm going to tell you the story of the first ever property that I owned and how I made £46,000 from owning it. So this is the house that I grew up in, a 3-bedroom mid-terraced council house. We moved into this house in 1997 when I was 3 years old. It was just me and my mum, the dream team. I was 3 and she was about 30 years old at the time. The house was owned by the local housing association and my mum paid rent every month. I went through nursery, primary school, high school, college, apprenticeships. I spent my whole life in this house. Renting the property from the local housing association worked absolutely fine for my mum. She was happy paying rent to them and I was happy with the very low amount of dig money my mum was asking for. At one point she was only charging me the amount of money that it cost for the Virgin Media for the TV and internet, which was at the time about £100 a month. An absolute steal. Granted, I was only making £666 a month at the time. So she was in no hurry to move and she wasn't particularly bothered about owning the place. Because the local housing association actually owned the property, if something like the boiler broke down, it was their responsibility to send someone out to fix it. But then my mum had a light bulb moment in 2015. Before I tell you about the light bulb moment, let me take you back to 1980. In 1980, Margaret Thatcher introduced a scheme called the Right to Buy scheme. In essence, this gave tenants of social housing the opportunity to buy the property that they have lived in. This also came with a large discount. In 2005, the scheme was then amended and any tenant that was looking to buy the property must have lived in it for 5 years. This is where my mum's light bulb moment came into play. She said to herself, why not buy the house? If we're getting it at a significant discount, it's a good opportunity. We had lived in the house at this point for 18 years, so we definitely qualified. But there was a minor hiccup in this plan. The Right to Buy scheme was ending in Scotland in 2016, so we had 8 or 9 months to purchase the property before the opportunity was gone. So we pulled our money together and borrowed a little bit of money from a family member and purchased the property in March 2016. The house was of course at a large discount and we got the property for £38,250. The plan wasn't to buy this house for a profit. Because we'd both lived there for 18 years at the time, it was realistically just a case of, if we're already living here, why not just own it instead of renting it from the local council? 2 years later I decided I wanted some independence, so I moved out and bought my own flat, and my mum continued to live there. In 2020, unfortunately, my mum did pass away, and I inherited her half of the property. And before I go any further, I'll just address this elephant in the room that occasionally comes up in the TikTok comments. He's had a leg up, he inherited that house. Yes, I inherited half of this house. Did I want to inherit it? No. Would I rather my mum was still alive? Of course. So let's not go down the inheritance rabbit hole. As mentioned, we didn't buy the property for a profit in the first place, and I would obviously much rather have my mum than half of this house. So when my mum passed away, I had 3 options for the house. Option 1 was to move into it, option 2 was to sell it, and option 3 was to rent it out. I didn't want to move back into the house. I'd lived in it for 20 years of my life, and to be honest, it probably would have been quite difficult for me to adjust to living in that house just myself, when obviously it was my mum's house, and then in my brain I associated that with being my mum's house after I moved out. So really it was a toss up between renting the property out or selling it. Initially I was planning on doing some minor renovation work and then renting it out. After doing the work to get it compliant as a buy to let, the plan was to remortgage the property, pull some equity out, maybe 60%, and reinvest that in 2 more buy-to-let properties. There was one small issue. Many of the houses in that area in Livingston are known as non-standard construction. This means that lenders are typically more stringent on lending against it. Pair this with the fact that my credit score wasn't exactly perfect at the time. Remortgaging was pretty much out the window, but I could still rent it out without remortgaging and would have made around £700 per month. The only thing that put me off that was the fact that it's non-standard construction. What if I wanted to sell it in 10 years time? It would still be non-standard construction, it would still put off potential buyers. It's a lot harder to sell a property that is unmortgageable than it is for a standard construction house. So first I identified the target market. Because it was most likely going to be a cash sale, I identified 2 target markets. A cash-rich investor who maybe had excess money in the bank, they were just looking to park it in an asset and receive a monthly return. Or potentially an older person or couple that are further along in life, maybe their kids have moved out, they're looking to downsize and they have equity in their home, and that could cover the cost of buying this house cash. So the decision was made, do a little bit more work to the house and sell it. So we were definitely in a seller's market at the time, which We still are. Most properties that I was seeing online were either selling over home report or going to closing dates, so it was time to get to work and try and take advantage of this hot market. Now bear in mind here, the closest thing I had to property renovation experience was the fact that I had painted a few walls in my flat and put down new carpets. So I was straight in at the deep end. Before I began ripping up carpets and stripping walls, I had to completely empty the house of all personal belongings. This took a couple days of going through absolutely everything in the house, deciding on what I wanted to keep, what items some family members might want or need, and then throwing the rest out. Next up was pulling the carpets up, stripping the walls, pulling off old skirting boards and facings, and removing the radiators. This all went as smoothly as you would expect. There isn't really any difficulty in scraping walls and ripping up carpets. The next stage, however, was to remove these beams in the kitchen ceiling. These beams weren't structural. The ceilings were made of solid concrete, so the beams were not holding anything up. I always presumed that my mum had maybe put these beams up to make the house feel a little more homely, maybe like a cottage in the countryside or something, and less like a mid-terraced council house in Livingston. In my opinion, it didn't really have the desired effect. So it took a while trying to figure out how these beams were held in place. Was there some sort of bracket? Were they just hollow and painted to look like wood? Maybe they were screwed directly into the ceiling? No. I hit one with a hammer and it started to come loose, and quickly realised that they were stuck to the ceiling and held there with a cocktail of glue, expanding foam and rolled up pieces of newspaper. I was too young to remember who put the beams up on the ceiling, but I wouldn't be surprised if they showed up on an episode of Cowboy Builders on Channel 5. The upside to this was they were very easy to take down. They were sort of in a crisscross pattern across the ceiling, so once you pulled one down, the rest came with it. Until I got to the last beam. It seems Clint Eastwood, or whatever other cowboy fitted the beams, decided that it would be a good idea to drill holes through one of the beams and feed the wiring and the pipes for the central heating through the middle. So in the process of taking the beams down, I almost took half of the central heating down with it. But with a little help of a mate and a multi-tool, we got the beam down without taking any cables or pipes with it. So as I mentioned before, the house was non-standard construction. More specifically, the house was built using a building system called Jesperson 12M. I think that means 12 metres, but I don't know. After looking further into this online, it seems like it was a popular building system, particularly for council houses in the 1960s when most of Livingston was built. Without going into too much detail or pretending I'm some sort of structural engineer who has any idea what he's talking about, Jesperson 12M essentially meant the ceilings and the walls were huge concrete slabs, and then the internal walls were made of wood or chipboard, cardboard, I don't know, something like that. So if you're downstairs, the floor is solid concrete. No floorboards downstairs. Then the walls on either side, between your house and your neighbours, solid concrete as well. This solid concrete went up 2 stories straight up into the loft. The ceiling for the downstairs just basically sat on top as another huge concrete slab. Then upstairs, floorboards along the top of the concrete, and the bedroom ceilings, solid concrete as well. It honestly sounds like I'm describing a building from the map Block in Call of Duty 4, which coincidentally I spent a lot of time playing in this house. So because of these huge concrete slabs, there was these grooves in the ceiling. Presumably these marks came from how the concrete slabs were manufactured, or maybe held together. This is what the beams in the kitchen were actually covering as well. And then the wiring for the lights would literally just run across the ceiling, hidden under some plastic trunking. It wasn't like these modern buildings where wires just got fed through cavity walls. They pretty much just stuck wires anywhere they could put them, by the looks of it. When starting the renovation, I decided I wanted to get rid of this. So in the process of having this cupboard, I decided to drop the ceiling just a little bit. This meant that the grooves in the ceiling were covered, and it left enough of a cavity for wires to be fed through and spotlights installed. While doing the ceilings, I decided to get all the walls plasterboard and then plastered over as well. If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing correctly, and I wanted the house to feel like a new home. Alongside this, I added new skirting boards and facings around the door frames. This was in the kitchen, up the stairs and all throughout upstairs. The ceiling in the kitchen was also dropped and spotlights added there as well, but the walls in the kitchen were in a lot better condition, so I just had these plastered without sheeting them as well. So now that we essentially had brand new ceilings, walls, skirting boards and facings, it was time to start painting. I had some free time and thought I'd save money and paint everything myself. Won't make that mistake again. First of all, I hate painting. I actually forgot how much I hate painting until I started. But to make matters worse, I had no idea that freshly plastered walls need extra paint, they need an undercoat. I felt like I'd painted every wall and ceiling 20 times. After painting all 3 bedrooms, I sacked it off and I got a painter in to finish the job. I also took the internal doors down, sanded them and repainted them white. And I know what you're probably thinking, why did you just paint everything white? It's boring, it's sterile, it's the same as everyone else does, whatever. My thoughts were, whoever buys this house may want to decorate. White walls and doors would make the place feel nice and fresh, but would also give the buyer the opportunity to make the place their own. Next up was the bathroom. So this bathroom was renovated a few years earlier, so the toilet, sink and bath didn't actually need to go anywhere. What I did change was the fittings, so there was new taps put on the sink and the bath. A glass shower screen was installed instead of one of the fabric ones that hangs from the ceiling. We then put wet wall panels on 3 of the walls, dropped the ceiling for a spotlight to be put in, and added a nice chrome towel rail radiator, and finished it off with some nice new vinyl flooring. Thankfully, a lot more work had been done to the downstairs than had been done upstairs. So the kitchen didn't need any worktops or cupboards or anything like that needing replaced. And the living room had been decorated 9 months previously, I think. So there was just a strip of wallpaper that needed replaced because a chair had been rubbing against it, and some new light fixtures just because I didn't particularly like the ones that were there. It was now time for carpets. So I got a nice dark grey carpet from a local carpet company. This went up the stairs, through the hallway and through all 3 bedrooms. At this point the house was pretty much ready to go on the market, except the garden. The back garden was a mess. It was full of rubbish that had just accumulated over time. Old pieces of fence, old garden furniture that had moss growing on it, and various random things. I found a road sign, presumably from the council. I don't know how that ended up there. My mum never really used the garden. She got all this decking put in, so it was relatively low maintenance, but then she still never really used it that often, so it just needed cleared out. So I hired a skip, filled it to the brim with rubbish, and still had to use my car to get rid of more rubbish because there was that much of it. There was also a piece of fence that I had blown down, and when I spoke to some fencing companies to see about getting it fixed, it turned out it was a bigger job than I had anticipated. After going through 3 companies who never called back, eventually my mate, the joiner, who done the plasterboard, cut the beam off the ceiling and done various other work, he came along and fixed the fence for me in 2 hours. So shout out to Zach. His joinery skills have got me out of a few scrapes before. Now it was just a few small issues that needed to be fixed. One of the window latches was broken in the living room, for example. The boiler wasn't responding correctly to the little control panel, just small things of that nature. And after all the work was done, the house was a mess. Dust, rubbish, pieces of plaster, empty coffee cups and Monster cans as far as the eye could see. Tradesmen love Monster, apparently. Paint splashes and splashes of plaster on the floor in between tiles. So I got in touch with a few cleaning companies, and all of the quotes were astronomical for the work that was required. So again, I opted to do it for myself, and again, regretted it. After many hours of going back and forward to the dump with cars full of rubbish, cleaning floors on my hands and knees, and countless trips to the shops to buy more cleaning supplies that I thought I had enough of, the house was finally finished. So the first step for actually putting a house up for sale is getting a surveyor into the property. The surveyor's job is to inspect the whole property and also put a value on it. He'll take into account things like the number of bedrooms in the property, the number of bathrooms, the style of the house, the level of refurbishment that's been carried out, what type of windows and doors there are, does the property have a chimney stack, does the roof need any work done, and a million other factors come into play. Once he has finished his inspection and he's looked at comparable properties in the area, he produces a home report, which gives the prospective buyer all the information they need for the property, including the market value. On the day of the inspection, I was feeling pretty confident. The property was looking good, I'd looked at comparable property sale prices, and I had a rough number in my head that I thought would be achieved. But of course, as is often the case, the home report came back at a lower valuation than I was expecting. This is quite a common occurrence, and it's the reason you should always be sort of conservative with your numbers with property. It's always better to underestimate your profit than overestimate it. If you underestimate it and then the valuation comes in higher, it's more money in your pocket. But if you overestimate it and it comes in lower, you could make a loss, you might not even make a profit. So before I tell you the value of the property, let's break down all of the costs. The purchase price of the property was £38,250. All plumbing work cost £2,924. Joinery work £8,682. Plastering was £1,500. Electrical work £1,200. Carpets were £870 to be supplied and fitted, and painting was £444. Bear in mind, I'd done some of that myself and the painter gave me a really good deal. So total amount spent on the refurb was £15,620. Selling costs were £2,700, and this covered the estate agent, the surveyor and the legal fees. So all in it was £18,320 for renovation and selling costs. But how much did the property actually sell for? Initially, after looking on Rightmove, Zoopla, having a look at previous sold prices, what some other houses were on the market for, I was hoping for a valuation of anywhere between £110,000 and £115,000. I based this number primarily off a few properties that had sold in the £105,000 region that had had no renovation done to them. Shows what I know. The surveyor valued my house at £105,000 as well. So in all honesty, I probably could have spent a lot less in renovation work and just sold it for 105 anyway, and that would have made a larger profit in my pocket. But the project was as much about profit as it was a labour of love for the house that I grew up in and the house that my mum lived in. So I never really got myself hung up on how much I could have made. I was very happy with the result. So how much did it actually sell for? After a few offers were submitted, I accepted a cash offer of £103,000. A cash offer means there's no mortgage required, and there was no chain where the buyer had to sell their house before they could buy my one. That means the property sells quicker and the money comes to me quicker. So what was the profit? The property sold for £103,000 minus £2,700 for selling costs, refurb costs of £15,620 and the initial purchase price of £38,250. This left me with a profit of £46,430. Was I happy with that profit? Of course I was. Now, this was my first property deal, and the learning curve was a lot steeper than I expected it to be. I'm sure there are much more experienced people watching this video thinking, why did you spend that much on this? Why didn't you do that? I'm absolutely certain in hindsight that I could have done this more cost effectively, but in my opinion, the experience that I gained in this process was just as valuable as that extra money that I could have made in profit had I cut some costs along the way. I'm very happy with the outcome of the project, and it provided me some more money to invest in buy-to-let properties. If only I could find any that were selling for home report or not going to closing dates. Anyway, I've went on long enough today. I hope you found this video interesting and useful. Thank you for watching, folks, and I'll see you next week. Take it easy.